Welcome to Love Connection, where old-fashioned romance meets modern-day technology. Where you hear all the intimate details of a first date. And now, here is our host, Chuck Woolery.
Thank you, Johnny Gilbert. Thanks, everybody.
When I was a kid, Chuck Woolery was everywhere. It seemed like everywhere anyway. He was the host of Love Connection, a really corny show that sent people on dates and followed up to see how it went. The big prize was getting a chance to take another date with one of the contestants. Not exactly,
Bill describes himself as 172 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal.
but who knows? It looked like fun. Love Connection was on TV for 11 seasons, 2,120 episodes. That's impressive. Woolery must have made a fortune. He was famous for saying, "We'll be back in 2 and 2," which meant in 2 minutes and 2 seconds, which was the standard time it took to run 4 commercials. What a country this is. There are a lot of strange ways to make a living. More recently, Woolery has been a source of some controversy. On July 12, around 10:30 p.m., he tweeted that everyone was lying about COVID-19 and that the whole thing was a plot to destroy the economy in order to destroy President Trump's re-election hopes. The president, of course, agreed with this assessment wholeheartedly and retweeted it to his 85 million followers. About 14 hours later, Woolery felt compelled to send a second tweet, this one very different. It turned out his son had just tested positive for COVID-19. Okay, it may not have been quite that dramatic. It was just a couple of tweets. Though on the other hand, Woolery probably didn't feel great about that. He probably experienced feelings of shame, humiliation. I think we've probably all been there. I know I've been there. I remember it really well. 3rd grade, Miss Ostrowski's class. There'd been a fight in the schoolyard and I was telling the story in class. There was a left, there was a right, there was a left. And when I got to the big punch, like literally the punchline, I farted. Loud. The whole class heard it. And the whole class laughed. Hard. Really hard. I even remember the kid right in front of me. I remember his name even. I won't mention it. He turned around with a long, cruel arm, pointed right in my face, and laughed. A big, grinning, buck-tooth laugh. Just to make sure nobody was confused about who'd done the farting. I bet that's how Woolery felt, like he'd farted in front of the whole class. Except that the whole class was all of America. I'm just glad that back in 1982, Trump wasn't there to tweet out my fart video to his 80 million followers. By the way, Woolery's son is apparently fine. But there is a serious issue embedded in all of this. Woolery is not alone. Lots of Americans believe that what's being reported by public health officials and other experts is at least exaggerated, if not downright false. A recent poll showed, for example, that 31% of Americans believe that COVID-19 fatalities are being exaggerated. This appears to be more or less what Woolery was trying to say when he tweeted that we are being lied to. And this widespread skepticism is having major consequences. All of this confusion over what constitutes reality has contributed to a deeply fragmented response to COVID-19. And now we're creeping up on almost 200,000 deaths. Experts are now projecting that we'll get to 300,000 before all is said and done. That's more than twice as many Americans as died in World War I, nearly 4 times as many as died in the Vietnam War, 100 times as many as died on 9/11. Now, Woolery, shortly after he sent out those tweets, ended up having to deactivate his Twitter account. A spokesperson said that this had been caused by the sheer volume of hate tweets that had been directed towards him. And while I realize this is small potatoes in comparison to the 200,000 or 300,000 people who might be dying from COVID-19, I do think it's also part of the problem. We can hardly talk about politics in America anymore without trying to eat each other alive. In fact, it seems like some people prefer to try to own each other on social media and in fact relish that more than perhaps trying to work together to prevent 200,000 or 300,000 people from dying from this epidemic. And here's the big point. I think we're living through a crisis right now in America, and I'm not talking about COVID-19. In fact, I think COVID-19, or at least our poor response to it, has been a symptom of this bigger crisis. It involves the inability to weigh the value of different sources of evidence. It involves an unwillingness to accept evidence-based arguments. It involves an inability to imagine that other human beings could be having experiences that are very different from our own. And it involves a lack of the empathy that usually comes with that ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes. Woolery lacked that empathy, but so did all the people who tried to humiliate him afterward. We've basically become a country of third graders waiting for the next person to accidentally fart so that we can publicly shame them over it. I've looked carefully at this problem and it's pretty clear what's going on.
All the skill and science I possess was meant for this.
The inability to weigh evidence, the unwillingness to accept evidence-based arguments, the lack of empathy are all symptoms of a very common affliction known as historical thinking deficit, or HTD. Most Americans today suffer from an HTD of some kind or another. They vary in their severity, and they can be treated, but it's not easy. You can't just head down to the CVS and sheepishly ask the pharmacist if she has a remedy. You've got to do the work. Like Rocky, getting ready for the big fight, except you're getting ready for the big thing we like to call life. Maybe at first you're a little skeptical and reluctant, but before long you're dancing in the water with Apollo Creed joyously promoting racial harmony. Or maybe you end up in Russia, improbably advancing the cause of world peace.
If I can change,
Я думаю, что каждый тоже изменился
and
сегодня.
you can change,
Вы можете измениться.
everybody can change.
There's an epidemic of HTDs out there, people, and it's a real problem, because COVID-19 is not our only crisis. We've got many others. Perhaps the most obvious comparison is climate change. There is a global scientific consensus that climate change is happening and that, if we don't take action, things are going to get really bad. 97% of the experts are in agreement on this. But millions of Americans think this is either nonsense or a hoax, or just not very important. Scientists warn that if we keep going in this direction, it will have disastrous consequences, especially for the world's most poor and vulnerable. That means especially people in the global south. And that means not Americans, which brings us back to the need to imagine ourselves in other people's shoes. Now let me be clear about something. I'm not suggesting that you should always just accept expert opinions simply because they're experts. Sometimes experts disagree. What I am suggesting is that you should use the skills of historical thinking to reach evidence-based, dispassionate conclusions about the problems that face us today in the world. But some people are incapable of doing this because they suffer from an HTD, and it can be nasty stuff. But I signed up for this class to learn some facts about the past. Oh, you will, and that's the beauty of studying history. You not only get to learn a lot about the fascinating subject at hand and thus wow your friends and family with your newfound brilliance, but you also get to treat your HTD. It's a 2-for-1 deal. Not quite as exciting as but not bad. So rejoice and prepare for your first treatment.